Hi, my name is Katie Walsh. I am a film critic for the LA Times and the Tribune News Service, and I am so excited to be with you here at the American Cinematheque for the amazing Q&A with directors Anna Rose Holmer and Celia Davis for the incredible God's Creatures. I love this movie. Anna and Celia, thank you so much for being here to talk about this movie with us. I'm so thrilled to be able to hear more about your process making this.
Oh, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for doing this. Thank you to everybody in the audience for sticking around. And thank you to the American Cinematheque for having us. We're really thrilled to be doing this sneak peek and having this conversation.
So, Anna, your first film was The Fits, which Celia, you also edited, produced, you worked on the story for it. So obviously that was an incredible film from 2015 that we loved so much. But we're going from this Cincinnati school to a seaside fishing village in the UK. What was it that that made you want to do this film and go to this completely different setting and world and story?
Well, I think with both projects, we were drawn most to the actual interior space of our characters more so than the exterior ones. With the Fits, Tony, the exploration of her interiority, her blossoming and approach to the world as a self and a group in a collective was something that we were exploring. And with this, when Fola Cronin O'Reilly, our producer, and Shane Crowley, our screenwriter, came to us, it was Aileen and the interiority of her that really compelled us. And we were like, this is a woman we haven't seen, and she excited us, she confused us, she drew us in. And yeah, it was those interior spaces of self that we were most drawn to, connected us with those projects.
What was the process like of moving from, obviously you were very close collaborators on the Fits and now you're co-directors on this, and why did you decide to go that route on the co-directing, and what was the process of kind of changing your I guess working process for
Sure.
for this film?
We worked on the Fits, but actually before that, Anna and I had collaborated in like different capacities before. I had directed something and produced. I edited a film called Ballet Fortitude, which Anna was a producer on. So like our partnership has kind of like constantly been evolving, was evolving before the Fits. And then after the Fits, I think we just recognized this like way in which we both think about story and like the films that we love. There was just like this creative kinship that we were like, this is a partnership that will continue to grow. And how can we push that? How can we change together? And really, decided like we want to write together. We want to keep doing that. And let's become a directing team. It was really as much as us like recognizing that like, creative love for each other and choosing to move forward in a way that felt exciting, somewhat radical, in this industry where typically a director is a singular person, or if you have a team, it's often siblings or married people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was just like there was this excitement and this energy around that decision. And we were also, before God's Creatures came along, we had been writing on television together with the intention to direct and have our own ideas that we've been breeding for some time. And so it just seemed like a natural progression, I guess.
And we both come from very distinct disciplines. Celia came up as an editor, I came through camera, and we have worked for a long time in service and in collaboration with other directors. And previously to the Fits, directing wasn't really a space that, I'm going to speak for both of us, like that we saw ourselves in. And the Fits was an experiment through and through about how can we explore this process and grow in this process. And some things we took from it, some things we discarded from it. And one of the things that came out of the Fits was like, I think there's even a more radical way to approach power, collaboration. Making films is really, it's like a privilege and a responsibility. And how do you hold that space and make it your own in an industry that has a very narrow way of thinking about how to make stuff? And we just, yeah, I think we talk a lot about like falling in love creatively and just like wanting to hold that partnership in a really special way and grow, push each other as people and creatives. And this kind of becoming a team felt it was very easy, very natural, organic. Yeah.
I love that you mentioned coming up from camera, and Celia, you came from the from editing, because I think what is so special about this film, first of all, the screenplay is beautifully structured in the way that it foreshadows and mirrors things, but I think the visual storytelling is so strong and so powerful. So you say a lot with a little, and some of these edits also, the way that you use the edit to get into the interiority of someone, or keep us locked into the interiority of Aileen specifically. So can you talk a little bit about reading the script and then sort of deciding on some of the visual language or some of the motifs that you wanted to use throughout God's creatures, or if there was some image that came to you right away that you knew you wanted to utilize in the film?
Yeah, I think when we first were approached with the screenplay, it was something that we wanted to be deeply involved in the development of the script as well. So a lot of those musings on the visuals, the cinematic interpretation was something that we were actually able to workshop quite a bit with Shane and Fola during the writing process. We worked for about 3 years, 2 to 3 years, developing the screenplay with them as directors, going to Ireland, watching the light, like listening to sounds. And so there was so much about how we decided to kind of like play with structure, and were conversations around writing. And so that was a really special part of the process.
And I think, when it's in the screenplay, like what's really beautiful about Shane's writing is it's very prose-like. And so he's very descriptive in kind of like specifically place. And I think that struck us, where we got really excited about like how to cinematically like, use environment to reflect interior space, and like use that to, like Ireland is beautiful. And when we went there, we kind of like saw these spaces, saw the water, saw the mountains, like, and really thought about how to incorporate that into this film, in a, not as like traditional sense, I guess, because I think typically Ireland on screen can be used purely for like the beauty shots, but for us, it was a reflection of Aileen's interiority. And so that was something I think we also recognized in reading the script, and visiting Ireland.
And then we were very much always like in all of our craft conversations with our production designer, with our cinematographer, with our sound designer, with our editing team, we were always saying, this appears as reality, but this is not reality. It's very important to us that this is a cinematic space that we are creating. This has a tone of realism, and we are dealing with real horrors, but everything must be interpreted through the psychological. And so there were opportunities that we saw in the script to actually kind of like twist things on their heads, and the turn that happens inside the film, we felt like really strongly had to be reflected in the language that we're using, needed to change, because all of a sudden, what the movie is about is different. So we need a different language, because we're all of a sudden we're looking at different things, we're looking in different directions, glances, gestures that we may have interpreted one way. We wanted you to be able to go back and look at them and say, oh, I misread this because I was reading it through a certain type of film language. And now that I have this greater understanding, I can read, so we wanted to play around with a lot of double meanings and layered meanings. So involve like full whole crew thinking about how we can do this, and how we can like bury things because actually Aileen's attention is so consumed by Brian that the audience looks and is consumed with the same kind of irrelevant narratives and dramas until kind of a different movie takes place. And so we wanted to play around a lot with that type of cinema language.
Yeah, I love so much the like really long push ins, like, you know, we're in the fish processing factory and then there'll be just a slow long push in on Sarah or Aileen or someone, and I just loved those shots, and it did sort of lend to, also to the sense of this is an intimate family drama, but it also plays like a suspense thriller at times. I think also, especially with the sound design and the score, really sort of amps up this like sense of suspense and ominousness. And I wanted to ask you as well about the sound design and what your thinking was behind that as well. And the music throughout is just incredible.
Thank you for asking this question.
We love talking about sound and music. It's something that, you know, from the very beginning is in our minds, like, well, you know, when we're writing, we're listening to soundtracks and we're really kind of constantly thinking about what is the musical sound of this film and like the body sounds of this film. And that applied to the Fits. You know, we worked with the same collaborators on that film as this film, Danny and Sonder, who are amazing, and Chris Foster was our sound designer. Yeah, so we love talking about it. I'll let Anna pick it up.
No, just that it's funny because we always say we are like, you know, cinema, like I want to go to the cinema not just to see things big, but to hear them big and to be surrounded and immersed. Like this is an art form that you can, one of the few art forms in which you can do that. You can surround and envelop and like hold somebody with a sound. And like, how cool is it that we get to manipulate in that way? And so it's something like it's in our own writing. We think about breath a lot. It's something we talk about with actors. When are you holding breath? When are you releasing? That's not just like a body performance, but it's this breath and rhythm that we get into. But you know, Danny and Sonder and Chris had collaborated together with us on the Fits, so they also had a shorthand. Sometimes we are like passing sounds back and forth. The sample of the oysters falling off the conveyor belt was something that, like, you know, we really were like, is this something that we want to enhance musically in the sound design, or do we sample that and put it in the music? And so it really was something that we looked to our collaborators for. And then, you know, Danny and Sonder are so playful and experimental in the score. That's something that we discovered in the Fits. And like, it can, like, just being open to the process and the play of the process is something we really like with them. And so there were some sounds we knew dread was, and that like kind of that thriller element was going to come in part through our score work. And dread was a word we used a lot, but the kind of like ghostly quality, we talk about God's Creatures as a making of a ghost film, making of a bad ghost film. It's like before the ghost film. And so how do you bring in that kind of haunting element right from frame one? So that bass flute comes in that opening sequence with the water. And that's like, there is a haunting already present in this place, which we come to know.
And we also talked about, you know, I think Anna was referencing it earlier, but kind of how the film changes, right, into something different, and like thinking about looking at the same space, but how's it changed? And so that's like communicated not only visually, but through the sound. So it's like the sound of the oysters is incorporated into that like haunting music, but it's like, so you're like hearing it first, it feels just like reality, but then how does it shift and how does it become part of like the horror that's building over time? And I think, yeah, we were in the sound design using kind of like stealing these elements in later scenes, but they're kind of like hidden, or, you know, you don't quite understand how it's changed. And so I don't know, it's fun to play with those elements that I think are often not as obvious, you know, to the viewer, but then you kind of like, you can hide them in there and they have this subconscious effect, and it's really yeah, it's just really fun to play with. So
I mean,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry. No, the music also, traditional Irish music was also a big part of the score. I mean, not the screenplay, excuse me. And we knew we wanted to augment, the score should occupy different space. And so we wanted to give Sarah her craft and traditional Irish music. We didn't want to be kind of stepping on her toes or occupying the same space as her. In an oral sense. So we wanted to really distinguish itself so that so that we could do both at the same time. We could have Sarah singing and score, and they would be distinct, and they could have a dissonance when we needed them to. There could be harmony when we needed to, but we wanted them to be different and distinct.
Yeah, I was going to say, the sound and the score, it also gives a sense of place. It is also part of creating this masterful tapestry of location and setting and subjectivity and psychology with our characters. So I just think it's masterfully done. So congratulations on that. But I would be remiss if I did not talk about the amazing Emily Watson. And I think that at the beginning of this, I think I said the UK and I meant to say Ireland, but I just got confused. So that was my mistake. Obviously, we're in Ireland. But this movie makes me think a lot of Breaking the Waves, which is one of my favorite films. Emily Watson on a windy bluff. We're dealing with patriarchy and misogyny and tiny communities of problematic values that have been passed on through generations. But I would just love to talk to you about working with her and what an amazing actor she is. I was just so thrilled to see her, doing this kind of work and in the leading role in this film. And so can you talk about, did you always have her in mind? And then what was the process of, working with her on this character?
Yeah. I mean, Breaking the Waves for us too is one of those films, I think, from film school that was just so mind-blowing, life-changing, and it's not an easy film to watch, but joy to watch Emily on screen in that film. And we had the joy of doing that for this process, watching that film several times. So we were beyond lucky when we found out that she wanted to collaborate with us on this film. She was someone that really embodied this character to us. And I think, examining Breaking the Waves, just her facial expressions are just so captivating. You can just stare at her for hours, and so that was part of it. Aileen, we really thought a lot about how her body moves, when she's working, what is the toll of what she's dealing with Brian, how does that affect her, her face, her shoulders, her hands. And so we knew, just Emily was the right person for the role.
I think she, that first conversation that we had, it's so, it can be very daunting to go to some of your filmmaking idols and say, we want to collaborate, is this enough? Is this, is there alignment? And it was so satisfying to get that back from her. But then that first conversation that we had, it was very apparent to us she's a filmmaker, she's an actor, she's a filmmaker, and that we were going to learn a lot from this process, but that also we could bring her into a new space for her decades in to her brilliant career was something that was really exciting for us. And a lot of that was about body. And so, she did come to Ireland, and she, worked with Fish Factory women there. She really wanted to physically be in that world for quite some time. To, we filled her recipe book with our production design, because, Aileen, her identity of mother is about providing, and so we talked about food, we talked about culture, and it was so invigorating, her dedication to the craft. But she's also so playful. She reminded us this is a heavy film, and we say it's a heavy coat we've been wearing for many years. And in order to do that type of work, you also need to find the joy in the process and the joy with each other. And she was someone who was always bringing us back. It wasn't like, I'm not talking about like goofing on set, but saying like, isn't this extraordinary that we get to wake up and this is our job every day? And to be reminded of that gratitude of craft was something that like I was so grateful for, and just really changed the tone of our set, having her there leading in that way.
But I think like just speaking to her as a filmmaker, I remember, we had about like 2 weeks of rehearsal before shooting. And I think it was her idea to kind of break out the rehearsal so that the first half was like all her and Brian like joyful moments. And then the second half being like when they're like, torn apart. And like that was really, I think, crucial for, especially for Aileen and Brian, like to kind of keep those moments in rehearsal like apart, to really just kind of like hone in on what are like the emotions they're feeling. And so Emily came into that space and was like, this first part's going to be the fun part, so we're going to like play in this time and then like transition eventually. And it was just like an interesting and like helpful thing to add to our process. I think we learned through that experience. So
but it was just a gift. And I think the moments in the film that like sing on all levels for us are those kind of spaces in between and the silences, which she is master at. So
well, her joy in her son, the Aileen joy and Brian, is so palpable, which is why that turn, which happens in the middle of the film, is so devastating. And I did actually want to ask about that specific moment. And I mean, I think you've kind of answered it in a way in talking about the interiority, but the choice to not show what happens between Brian and Sarah, I think I mean, I don't even know if this is a question, more of a compliment, but it's, the way you cut that scene where it's like there's a knowingness when she leaves, and then we see her in bed, and then it's like the music and the sound is going, and then she wakes up with the start, and it's just like everything's gone completely in a different direction. So I mean, in keeping us with, not seeing what happened, I mean, was that a choice? You always never wanted to show the rape? And I think that's a really interesting choice. Can you talk a little bit about that? Or if it was just to keep us with Aileen the whole time?
It was always very clear to us that the rape had no place as a scene that the audience would experience, for lots of different reasons. First and foremost is, for us, Sarah's word is enough. And this isn't a procedural. We are aligned with Aileen's psychology. We are experiencing the unfolding events through her eyes, and she has a revelatory process. But as filmmakers, we are not putting Sarah's word on the line, I guess. And it's like very important to us. But also that this is a film about the ramifications of violent acts, and that for us cinematically is always much more potent, because the violence actually continues to ring out and reverberate throughout the rest of the film. Like we are living in the wake of that violence.
And you're experiencing that kind of it's through Aileen's eyes, right? And so Aileen doesn't have access to that information, and that's important to kind of like travel with her to kind of like on her journey of we called it like Aileen's descent. It's like her realization, she's in denial. She does this thing instinctively, like she lies, and then she must like eventually see the truth, but like she'll never know the details of what happened. But that's irrelevant, because it is about kind of watching Sarah and understanding, as Anna said, like the effects of the trauma, right? And then that's kind of like that should be enough. They were close friends before, and all of a sudden, like she's not willing to listen. And so, but going back to like that moment that you were speaking to, like we also call that like the moment after Aileen leaves the pub until she like wakes up in bed, like that's like Aileen's nightmare. So in a way, you are actually like experiencing the moment, but again from like Aileen's like mind's eye, I guess. And so yeah, but it was always from the beginning our, you know, it's not in the script. It was never something that we were gonna shine a light on because those are irrelevant to us.
Yeah, I think that was a really powerful choice. I also wanted to talk about Paul Mescal's performance. He's so, I mean, we all love Paul Mescal. We've all seen Normal People. But the way that he turns into a villain, you know, he comes in this sort of charming rogue mama's boy kind of way. But he sort of seems like someone who can kind of shapeshift and be whatever he needs to be in whatever shape, you know, whatever space he needs to be in. But he's an incredibly inscrutable character. So how did you work with him on who Brian was and how Brian changes over the course of this story? And I just think it's really, it's such a subtle way of turning us against him in a way, even though he is kind of unknowable.
Yeah. Brian is really tricky, is someone who, you know, we had to get to know through writing and directing this film. And what is interesting through the writing and directing of this film, you know, what is interesting about Brian is that charisma, he weaponizes that charisma. And so you as an audience need to be able to fall in love with him, to understand his hold on, not just on his mother, but on his household, on his community, and not just Brian, but men like Brian, you know, and that sense of entitlement, the way you move through spaces knowing you won't be questioned, is something that I think with Paul, we wanted an actor that we adore Paul. We wanted an actor who we felt safe asking really hard questions. And, you know, this is not easy material to dig into. We wanted to be able to engage with Brian and also engage with Paul as an actor, as a human, to be able to have conversations outside of just character development as an artist. And that was something that was like really important. But for Brian's development, it was a lot about, you know, how other people reflect themselves on Brian. Like you said, that kind of shapeshifter quality. He's trying to be who he knows the person in front of him wants him to be. And there's this kind of double speak that's happening throughout.
Yeah. But we all, you know, Paul's approach to, I think for many actors, you can't like judge the character you're playing. You have to have like an understanding of who they are. And so, you know, I think on his own, he went into like that exploration together. We went into that exploration, really trying to understand Brian as a person. And, you know, we talk a lot about how like often the people who commit these crimes are not just like some shadowy, you know, character in a dark alley, like there's someone, you know, right? And so like Brian is a real person, like he has feelings, he hurts as well. And there are, who knows, you know, multiple reasons for why he chooses the things he chooses to do. And, you know, Paul was very generous. And as Anna said, I think we felt very safe, like exploring that really like scary space with him. And he definitely like would push himself, you know, when we were on set and into challenging spaces. And I think it was emotional for all of us to try to imagine why someone like the Brian you meet in the beginning becomes the Brian you meet at the end.
I know. What happened in Australia? That's what I want to know. Something happened there.
Yeah.
Not to laugh.
It happens. Yeah. It's like, I think it's like so much of our work with all of our actors was actually making decisions about off-screen.
Yeah.
Events. You know, the night of the rape, like in order to achieve, you know, with Aisling, for example, like in order to get where we wanted to go with a monologue, we had to have really explicit creative direction and decisions around all of the events that happen off screen for Sarah. And with Paul, we did the same. Sometimes those events were not the same for each the choices they were making, but we wanted like every moment off screen to feel lived in and full and clear for those characters. And so there was so much work, character development that we did around events that the audience never sees, but you need that to get to the next stepping stone. Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you two enough for this wonderful conversation. I love this movie. I adore this movie. And listening to you speak about it so thoughtfully has been such a treat. So thank you so much for this Q&A. And please tell us where we can see God's Creatures and what date.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It was so lovely to have a conversation. I think this is, one of our first, and so it was such a treat. And where?
Well, thank you to the audience too for being
Thank you,
here.
audience.
But we open on September 30th with A24 here in the States, in theaters and online. So, this is a film that we hope as many people as possible can experience in a cinema. So please, spread the word, and we hope this was a meaningful evening for all of you.
Thank you so much. And yes, go see it in the theater. You got to hear this movie. I mean, you guys are already in the theater. You know what it's like. So tell everyone to do the same thing. But thank you so much. And thank you to the American Cinematheque.